Hello and welcome to the Cinementalist podcast for cinementalist.com, or as we should correctly call it this week, the Cinementalist Sweatbox.
Yep.
My name's Andy. Sitting next to me is Floki, our bearded dragon mascot, who I think is cooler than us in his tank at the moment. And sitting opposite me is, of course, our film critic extraordinaire, Liam. How's it going, my friend?
You know how it's going.
It is a heat wave. Hooray.
Yeah. Well, you know, I am a summer man. I do enjoy the summer. Within reason.
Within reason. It's currently 32 degrees with about 70% humidity in the UK, which makes us officially hotter than Florida at the moment, except we don't have any air conditioning.
It's lovely, isn't it?
And for the purposes of recording, we had to shut the doors and the windows and turn a fan down in the distance very much on low. So we're going to try and be high energy, but at the moment it's a little bit of a struggle. I think I've drunk my own body weight in sugary drinks this week. I'm not sure about you.
It's kind of hard not to. I mean, I know a lot of people like opt for water, but water's boring.
Well, I don't normally consume like any sugar whatsoever. So I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to go from no sugar whatsoever to like 18 fizzy drinks in 1 week. I'm pretty sure that your pancreas doesn't like that.
The thing is, I don't really know what I'm playing at, because every single morning that I make myself a cup of coffee, I always consciously use, Canderel as opposed to sugar. But then I just eat lots of shit anyway, with lots of sugar and calories in it. Just kind of defeats the purpose, but I like to delude myself that I'm doing something a bit sensible.
I'm currently drinking a Mountain Dew Citrus Blast, and before you think, oh no, Cinementalist has gone commercial and started doing adverts, I can confirm to everyone, Mountain Dew Citrus Blast tastes like shit. It tastes like washing up liquid.
You just liked the semi-attractive can.
It looked refreshing when I saw it in the shop, and I thought, you know what? Yeah, maybe one of those.
That's how they fucking get you.
It tastes like washing up liquid. Yeah, so please go out and buy a can of that. You won't regret it, I promise you. Anyway, let's get on with some news, shall we? There has been stuff happening in the film world this week.
Any good stuff?
Some, I think. Yeah, there's been a trailer released for Ridley Scott's latest. I'll go on an article here from empireonline.com. You had to hand it to Ridley Scott. At the age of 83, the director shows little signs of slowing down. If anything, he's ramping up, continuing to make movies at an astonishing pace and creating colossal confounding work at that. After heading to TV for his wild sci-fi show Raised by Wolves, that I enjoyed very much, he has 2 films hitting cinemas before the year is through, scheduled to arrive within weeks of each other. One is House of Gucci, his crime thriller about the notorious fashion family, and the other is The Last Duel, his historical drama with a stacked cast and some major talent in the writing department too. So the trailer...
Last Duel, that's Matt Damon, isn't it?
It is indeed, yeah. Matt Damon, Adam Driver, and Ben Affleck's in there as well. And apparently, Matt Damon and Ben Affleck have co-written the script. It's an adaptation of a novel, but they've done the adaptation.
Oh, okay.
Which is interesting, sort of a throwback to the Good Will Hunting days and all of that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that did have a very solid screenplay. So, it's going to be interesting to see what they've conjured up this time.
Yeah, a bit of a dark plot, actually. Set in 14th century France, essentially it hinges on Comer's Marguerite de Carew accusing driver's Jacques Legris of raping her, of which he denies. The fallout results in a trial by combat between Legris and Marguerite's husband, the knight Jean de Carew, Damon, and each of their lives hangs in the balance. If Legris wins the fight and kills Jean, Marguerite will be burned at the stake too.
Damn.
Yeah.
It's pretty heavy duty, isn't it?
I mean, I love Ridley Scott. I'm a huge fan of Ridley Scott. I really wish Kingdom of Heaven was a better film.
Well, isn't there like some sort of director's cut that...
supposedly fixes it. Yeah, I have been told this.
Yeah, I've come across a lot of people that champion the other version.
Yeah, apparently so. But yeah, as a big fan of Ridley Scott, and I'm really interested in like the Crusades period of history as well. I mean, it was sort of ruined by Orlando Bloom, as so many films are. But yeah, it was baggy narratively as well, although it had some really, really good ideas in it. So Ridley Scott doing another historical epic. I'm hoping especially with the Damon Affleck duo going on in the background, I'm hoping that this is a bit tighter and a bit cooler.
The thing is, nowadays, whenever anyone mentions Orlando Bloom, the film that always jumps to mind is The Outpost. And I think the reason for that is because it's been the only motion picture I've seen where I actually liked him in it.
Yeah.
So,
well, there you go. Yeah. But yes, Ridley Scott has a lot of work coming. I'm interested to see House of Gucci as well, because that strikes me as a story that needs to be told. And I love that Ridley Scott, if anything, is sort of speeding up in his... Oh yeah, I was about to say Twilight years. I'm not even sure they are his Twilight years. He seems to be one of those people that might actually have a good shot of living forever, given that he's in his 80s now and he looks about 62.
Yeah, 100%. You say House Gucci is a crime thriller.
Yeah. So there was a lot of...
The Gucci family, were they mafia connected?
As I understand it, they were sort of like a fashion mafia. Yeah, but I don't know that much about it, so I'm quite interested.
I was wondering if it's because, I mean, like, because I was thinking about, like, 'cause obviously there's that Paolo Sorrentino film, Il Divo, about, I can't remember the Prime Minister's name, but he was like a notoriously mafia-connected Prime Minister, 7-term Prime Minister of Italy, and I was wondering if it was... like if the Gucci household had some organised crime affiliation, because
I had a sudden idea just flashed through my head as you were saying that I'd like to see Nicholas Winding Refn for some reason do the Berlusconi story.
Wow!
Just suddenly, I threw those two things together in my head and thought, yes, actually, I'd really like to see that.
Can you imagine Nicholas Winding Refn's interpretation of a Bunga Bunga sequence?
Exactly, right? All the colour tint shifts and all of that.
That would be the stuff of fucking nightmares, man.
I don't know where that idea came from, but now I'm desperate to see it. This isn't a film in the works, but damn it, we're going to champion it on the CINEMENTALIST podcast.
Somebody please get this
listening.
to Mr. Refn and make him interested, because we really want to see it.
Or just the podcast.
Can't offer any financing, but, he's a man of the arts. Surely he'll just want to.
To be honest, we'll take a retweet at this point. Our second article this week is from theguardian.com. There is the Paul Verhoeven movie in the works at the moment, Benedetto. Actually, not in the works. It's had a Cannes Film Festival debut.
Oh yes, about the licentious nuns.
Licentious nuns, indeed. That's his IMDb tag, if I remember correctly. But he's apparently had to defend it quite a lot because a lot of people are finding it very, very controversial. I'll read from the article here. The film, by the Dutch director of Basic Instinct and Total Recall, is accused of blasphemy and misogyny by some critics, and a mere lurid theatricality by others. Scenes of torture and of explicit sex, one including the use of a statuette of the Virgin Mary as a sex toy, run through the film. While some critics have applauded Verhoeven's bold showmanship, others left the premiere on Friday with a mix of amusement and anger. Speaking on Saturday, the veteran director defended his new film from all charges. It is, he said, based on historical fact. I don't understand how you can be blasphemous about something that really happened 400 or 500 years ago. That is wrong. It is done. You can't change history. The word blasphemy in this case is stupid, he said.
Number one,
riling up the critics.
Number one, just yes. And number two, this is the man who gave the world things like Basic Instinct and L. So I think if you're familiar with his work and you're not expecting some sort of lurid and confrontational sexuality.
Yeah,
especially in the, because obviously he's made films that don't cover that particular content, sure, but it is a very recognisable trait of, a strong part of his work, and I just think to react like that just seems a little bit, it's like ostentatious. Oh, I'm so offended.
Yeah, to be honest, it's a great PR boon for the film as well.
Yeah.
It's keeping it in people's news feeds. And actually, that description of it just kind of makes me want to see it more. And I'm sure I'm not alone in that one.
This is not a story he just completely made up either.
No.
This is like he's just visualising a tale that was already in existence. To be quite honest with you, this is this upcoming film adaptation is the first time I actually became familiar with that tale itself. So, there can't have been a great width and breadth of lots of horrors complaining about it globally beforehand. So, it's just like, fuck off, just give it a chance.
Yeah, I'm going to read actually the last paragraph of this article because it ends on a really interesting note. And we'll see what we think of this, okay? Blasphemous or not, it certainly follows the festival's ignoble tradition of showing at least one outrageous film. It joins a list that includes Lars von Trier's 2009 Antichrist with its sadistic and masochistic acts, British director Michael Winterbottom's 2004 erotic romance 9 Songs, and Gaspar Noé's Irreversible of 2002, which featured a prolonged rape scene. Benedetta's screenplay, written by Verhoeven with David Burke, says yes to every excess, except at one notable point to a donkey.
What?
Yeah, I had to read that a couple of times. Well, hang on, what does that mean? It says yes to every excess, except at one notable point to a donkey. So So is a donkey alluded to? Or I have no idea, but I really want to see this film, and not because it sounds horny, okay? Let's get that whole pervert thing out of the way immediately. We're serious critics. You know, I want to see Verhoeven do sexy nuns, and I want to see what he does with it, and blaspheming nuns. I mean, you know, what a subject.
Well, you know, he's done sexy serial murderers and kind of sexy twisted feminism as well. So, what, you know...
Is Total Recall the only film of his that isn't overtly sexy? I was just thinking there isn't really...
We got RoboCop as well.
I guess, yeah, no, it's fair enough. Although you could make allusions to analogies, I suppose. But yeah, fair enough.
Well, I don't know if you get off on cyborgs like blowing a guy's dick off, you know, maybe. Like,
there is that, yeah. Acts of penetration, man. You know?
Is that dirty talk your move, creep? You know, I suppose it could be, couldn't it?
Someone out there is getting off to this podcast. We encourage it. My last article this week is from Deadline.com. After a thorough search that involves months of meeting a slew of talent, Marvel's new Blade movie has found its director. While a deal is not yet done, sources tell Deadline that Bassem Tariq, best known for directing the Riz Ahmed film Mogul Mowgli, is in talks to helm the new adaptation of the popular comic, with Mahershala Ali set to play the iconic vampire hunter. Stacey Osai Kafur is on board to pen the script, with Marvel Studios president Kevin Feige producing, or Kevin Feige perhaps. We've got mixed feelings about the Blade reboot.
I love the Wesley Snipes Blade.
A lot of love for that film, yeah.
It's probably, if I, you know, I'm not a massive CBM guy, but I do love the 1998 Blade very much. But I also really, really dig Mahershala Ali.
That's an excellent piece of casting.
A fucking lot. I really like the guy. So, and his casting has considerably tempered my initial, like, no fucking way, don't do that, don't ever do that. Because if you've got him in the hot seat, that makes me a bit more optimistic, a hell of a lot more optimistic than I would have been.
Yeah, and if this turns out to be true, I mean, Deadline's reporting this as a strong rumor, essentially, and Deadline are often right on this sort of thing. They've got excellent sources. Bassam Tariq is a really, really interesting choice as a director as well, because I hadn't heard of him previously. I looked up his credits earlier. He's only got one feature film under his belt, which was Mogul Mowgli, and one documentary as well, a lot earlier than that. But he's a Muslim American, and he's done sort of documentary pieces and sort of supporting young American Muslims in the creative field and all this kind of stuff. So you'd expect, I mean, Marvel, obviously, it's that entire MCU is a multi-billion-dollar thing at this point. It's a juggernaut. Blade is one of the more recognizable facets of that juggernaut. To hand it over to a director that, as best as I can tell, although he's done a lot of work, he hasn't done a lot of big-scale releases. In fact, really any big-scale releases. To hand it over is a really, really interesting choice. I mean, the stuff he's done so far and the things he's supported so far have been quite arty and high concept and documentary-driven. So to go and do a Blade movie is just a bizarre choice. But there's some interesting things going on with this. It seems like this might not be your average blockbuster skyscrapers fall down Marvel movie we've seen a million times.
I've yet to see it, but I've heard extremely good things about Mogul Mowgli. So you say the director, you say Sam Tariq is a Muslim?
Bassam Tariq, yes. Yeah,
because I know that, because obviously, if I'm correct, I believe that Mahershala Ali is the first Muslim to ever been given an Academy Award.
Oh, interesting.
I think that's the case, and I know that Riz Ahmed is also a Muslim. I don't know, is there like a sort of a vein of Islamic thought running through his work? Or
I believe so, yeah. Mogul Mowgli was about a British Pakistani rapper. And so they're doing something interesting culturally with this, which pricks my ears up and thinks, hang on, there's more to this than your average. I mean, sometimes we read out these pieces about big blockbuster releases that are incoming, particularly Marvel movies, and we kind of, I'll admit it, we're a bit snobby about it. We roll our eyes a little at it. But there seems to be something going on under the surface here that suggests that there's going to be some interesting themes and depth and left field choices, and I think that's kind of cool. But anyways, we shall see how that turns out. Anyway, yes, that is the end of my news segment this week. We've got a lot of stuff to review. Normally at this point, I say that Liam's got 2 films to review, but I think you're varying it up a bit this week, aren't you?
There is a little bit of variation this week, actually. But first off, because I just want to, there has been something running now for the past couple of weeks, and it's come to a close, and I just wanted to bring it to a close contextually on our platform.
Okay.
Because I watched the third and final installment of the Fear Street series, 1666.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So now,
This is the hotly anticipated one out of the
Yes,
three,
this
at
is
least on this podcast.
This is this is the finale to R.L. Stein's Fear Street adaptations that has been running on Netflix for I think the first one landed. It was about a month ago now, 3 weeks to a month. And initially 1994, and then 1978, and now in 1666. Now, obviously, on the previous 2 weeks running, I covered the first two installments, and I mentioned about how the sneak peek of this one, the third entry, it definitely pricked up my ears, but that idiom doesn't really make a lot of sense. But it
pricked out my eyes.
Yeah. It bolstered my anticipation, would be far more accurate to say. Because this is the denouement of the series, and it transports us way, way, way back into the past, the 17th century. And if you've listened to the previous episodes, but you've yet to watch the series, any of the series, you'll be aware that the town of Shadyside, Ohio, is blighted by a curse amid its ongoing long-term rivalry with the sort of preppy adjacent town of Sunnyvale. And all of this has to do with a witch by the name of Sarah Fear and a curse that she's placed over Shadyside that essentially turns everyday citizens into maniacal, unstoppable, brutal killers. So the third and final entry transports us back to the genesis of this story. And it brings back a lot of cast members, the overwhelming majority of cast members from the first two installments. And most of them are playing their characters' antecedents, which I thought was like a decent little touch. But you've got one of the main gang who has essentially been transported back in time, at least not necessarily in a literally there kind of way, but more in a, like a chronovisor, where you can see the past.
Oh, okay, yeah.
It's more like, so it's essentially it's not really being.
I'm saying that like it's everyday technology.
Yeah,
like,
but
I've got one of those.
You've come across
right?
you come so you can wear a head apparatus and you can see past or future events without literally. So it's more that, even though she doesn't have one of those contraptions, it's more in the vein of something like that than actually being right there in the literal past. Every atom of her, all that bollocks. And one of the team is back there in that fashion as the aforementioned Sarah Fear, the terrifying witch who is the central catalyst in all of these horrible events that have tormented this poor town for centuries and centuries now. Basically, once again, it's a core crew of characters. Not obviously not solving the mystery this time, because this is prior to the manifestation of the mystery, but this is the events surrounding it and how it builds up. There's a lot of parallel in characterization to especially the first movie. A lot of because I mentioned in the first film you have Dina and Sam, who are in a same-sex relationship, but they obviously had to part ways quite acrimoniously because Sam moved away to Sunnyvale from Shadyside. And in this entry, Dina is basically Sarah, visualising herself as Sarah Fear in this one. I know it's a bit of a spoiler, but I can't really get around that one. Her and Sam, as one of her antecedents, they are also in a same-sex relationship, and this is also taking place in 17th century Ohio, so a very puritanical sort of settlement. So it's egregiously more dangerous.
I imagine lots of pointy hats and aprons and that sort of thing.
But yeah, that sort of get up
kind of
and just very sort of tattered, mottled settler clothing and all that palaver. Lots of straw huts and fucking chickens and hogs and all that bollocks everywhere, and kids entertaining themselves by chasing each other with pitchforks.
Back when America was full of Americans.
Yeah, America was full
Except
of Americans.
they were Dutch English.
Yeah. And so, we have this sort of puritanical Shadyside community in 17th century Ohio, and they are the ones who are on point to basically see the genesis of the Sarah Fear myth, how it came to be, who directly started it, and for what reasons. I can't really say much beyond that without giving lots of the synopsis away, but it is the chapter that brings everything to a close. It's the point where everything prior to it makes sense, and it does conclusively wrap up what and why and how this curse that has blighted Shadyside started and what can actually be done to stop it. And yes, Sarah Fear is central to this curse, but she is a lot more of a protagonist than one would initially take her for. And it involves a lot of people who were in the previous two adaptations, if not rendered good, they were at least morally ambiguous. But this adaptation finally settles, as I said, the who, how, and why. Now, I said that I was really looking forward to this one to see because I thought that the first one was okay, the second one was a lot better, and so, especially with the sneak peek of 1666, I was really hoping that this would be the strongest entry in the series. Now, in terms of the script, those are the actual screenplay and the exposition that we are given as to why all of this is occurring. And in terms of the intended emotional punch, it is well written. However, try as I might, there's one thing that I couldn't get past that ultimately spoiled the whole experience for me. And I really don't I don't have any intention of offending any of our US listeners. But it has got the whole cast, a cast of American actors doing settler accents, which is sort of a mangle of Northern Irish and West Country from as best as I could guess. And it is so fucking invasively distracting. I really wanted to be on board with this one because there is some cool cinematography in it. As with the other two installments, there are some spooky shots. There are some moments of decent calculated terror. There's a particular small portion of the film that involves the effects that the curse has on the local reverend, which is actually quite harrowing and unpleasant, and I thought that was quite well done. But I'm sorry, I know this might sound shallow to some people, but the fucking accents. I played it for about 15 minutes and I paused it and I went outside, namely to just get outside and have a drink because it's so fucking hot. But I was thinking about it when I was outside and thinking, I'm having some problems with that aspect.
So you're saying that they're so badly done, they're distracting? Yeah,
I just found them, they were really, really, it just seems like so utterly forced. And, I was actually talking to a friend earlier saying, like, well, I don't really look at a slasher film for historical accuracy, and that's a very, very fair point and one to take on board. But number one, it's far less of a slasher film than the previous two installments. There is still slashing in it, but it doesn't. The Fear Street 1 and 2, they do explicitly follow a slasher formula in a way that this one deviates from, for understandable reasons, seeing it's got more to do with the origin story of a terrible curse. So it makes sense for, that the slasher element not to dominate the script here as it has in the other ones. That makes perfect sense narratively. That's absolutely fine. The story in and of itself is not bad. It's just the accents were so intrusive and badly done. And in terms of my subjective viewing, that just completely and utterly trounced every other element of the performances here. And it did lead to me essentially, once the credits rolled, I just said to myself, well, I didn't really give a shit about any of that because I couldn't get into it. I could not get into it because it was just...
That's such a shame though, because from what you were saying on your previous couple of reviews, it seemed like the whole thing had started to gather momentum and it started to make sense. It was going down an interesting path. There were a lot of sort of green shoots, if you like, in your review, I noticed, of like, oh, actually, there's some stuff going on here that I'm really starting to get into.
Yeah.
To be taken out of it simply by what essentially is bad performance is, that's a shame, really, isn't it?
Well, because the central character here, who is, Dina, but Sarah Fear in the past, she was the focal player in the first installment. And her performance is decent in that one. It's not that any of these people are particularly bad actors. As I said, there's a lot about the performances of the second Fear Street that I valued. I thought that they were good. I thought that it complemented the suspense nicely. It was, even though I haven't thought any of these films were standouts, I certainly thought that the Camp Nightwing 1978 installment was cool, and it definitely made me more intrigued in this universe than I had been by the initial one. But as far as it goes, it's first one. My ultimate adjudication was yeah, kind of fun. Second one, oh yeah, that was better. Okay, that was cooler. You know, just bolsters my anticipation for the climax. The climax itself, oh well, that was actually the least enjoyable one of the bunch.
It's such a shame when you've invested so much time into that as well, and you're starting to get into
and I know,
it lets you down.
And I know that there's going to be people saying like, why take it too seriously? Why not just maybe like have a giggle at the fact they're doing some silly accents? Well, it's because even though there is sprinklings of dark humor aimed at late teens, young adults, and to be fair, older generations as well, throughout it's not supposed to be a silly comedic series. It is a horror franchise, and there is a lot of...
It wants you to take it seriously.
Yeah, and there's a lot of quite strongly emotive thematic content in it. Namely, the way that people in loving same-sex relationships have been historically treated, and especially the ways they would have been treated. I mean, in the early 90s, it still would have been fucking bad. Imagine what it's like in the 17th century.
Sure, yeah.
These are weighty
Mostly
themes.
underground, I would have thought.
Absolutely, 100%. These are weighty themes. These are themes that the series itself doesn't trivialize or fetishize. It just treats it as it is. It's normal. It's just a normal facet of life. Some people are gay. That's just it's just fucking simple as that. And and it was approaching that in just a mature and level-headed way, in a way that humanized the characters. And there's also themes of, there's religious tyranny and hysteria and wanton selfishness and, what happens if some people are, tempted by the Dark One who may or may not exist. Is Sarah Fear, was she actually a witch, or was she just a horrifically, unjustly persecuted woman? And all of this is, some... mass psychosis that has been had some supernatural adjunct tacked on, and everyone has just been misinterpreting coincidences for centuries upon centuries. Now, these are all interesting things to have in coalescence, but yeah, it's the goofy fucking accents, man. Sorry, it really is. It really...
And not even in like a comedy way. Where you
no,
get a kick
it
out
just
of it.
really terminated my enjoyment, because there were scenes that were supposed to be taken seriously, that were supposed to aid the suspense and the mystery, and I couldn't take them seriously because of people talking about, you're not in the grace and favour of the Lord, young Sarah, blah, blah. And it's just like this mangled fucking settler accent that just doesn't feel or sound natural in any way whatsoever. The accents, are straight out of a very, very horrendously stagey after hours high school rehearsal about some kind of New England settlement.
Right.
Basically, or more Midwestern to, maybe be a bit more accurate, but it really, really ruined it for me.
Ah, shame.
And I hate saying that, because I was excited about this one. And yeah, I do agree with my friend that I think she made a very good point in saying I don't look to slashers for historical accuracy. Not historic, no, that's very true, but still, right from the outset, it kind of nips it in the bud there for me, and I really tried hard for it not to, because I wanted to close this off and get to the conclusion of the story and ultimately feel satisfied with everything that had gone on before. But it was that detail. I was just like, I'm just kind of irritated by this. I'm irritated by how glaringly conspicuous it is. And so shallow reason for panning this one? Maybe so, but all I can do is be honest.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Fair enough,
I just
mate.
couldn't get past that. It did my fucking head in. But then next up, in a bit of a change around from usual, as we say, the next one is it's a miniseries. Not a television series, which is usually your territory, but it is a miniseries. It's a 3-part BBC miniseries that aired, I believe was it last month this aired now?
I think so, yeah. We discussed it last month, yeah.
But I watched Jimmy McGovern's Time, starring Sean Bean and Stephen Graham. And obviously this is created by Jimmy McGovern, who a lot of people will know most famously as being the mastermind behind Cracker, the much beloved series starring Robbie Coltrane, which is a very cool little series indeed that I enjoyed very much growing up. And Jimmy McGovern quite justly won a lot of awards for his writing in that. Did you ever watch Cracker?
No, I didn't. I'm ashamed to say.
Oh man, Cracker's great. Robbie Coltrane, misanthropic, horrible, alcoholic, chess-obsessed cop.
You know what? Now you mentioned that, it's sort of ringing a bell. I think I might have caught a bit of it, but it's not so.
Very, very good. One starring Robert Carlyle. But anyway, I digress. So in Time, Sean Bean stars as Mark Cobden. Now, Mark Cobden is 57 years old. He's a secondary school teacher, and he seems to be an all-around, run-of-the-mill. He's kind of like your typical unassuming middle-class teacher. He's a fairly sort of quiet guy. He's mild-mannered, but over the past few years, he has been blighted by a considerably bad drinking problem, an extremely bad drinking problem, one that is not only led to employment problems, but it's also caused a lot of strife on the domestic front with his wife, Alicia, and son, Tom. One fateful night, this culminates in Mark driving home from the pub after several large vodkas, knocking down a cyclist and killing him. And for this, Mark is ultimately sentenced to 4 years in prison for unlawfully taking a life while driving under the influence. So his main character defect is that he is a pisshead, and it's that very defect that has just led to 4 years of his liberty. This man who's been a teacher for years and years, who has never had one scrape with the law, and not had a fight in 40 years, now being banged up for 4 years. So obviously, the opening scene of this is Mark in a transit van en route to prison. And there's a gang of young Liverpudlian lads who know each other and are really, really violently shouting and screaming at and abusing each other through their respective holding cells on the van en route to the penitentiary. And Mark is obviously sat there, and understandably he is fucking terrified. And right off the bat, because I've always been an enormous fan of Sean Bean, and right off the bat, Sean Bean captures this perfectly. This terrified fish out of water who is just in a complete daze, firstly because of what he's actually done, and secondly because of where it's landed him, just in the small period of time this is taking place in. Sean Bean really conveys this guy feels almost as if he must have been just taken and plonked on some sort of alien planet, however many millions of galaxies of light years away. He is just complete stone petrified, completely fucked. And so Mark gets into the prison, and he goes through the initial. He's issued his prison clothes. He's has to turn over his possessions. He's asked to state how long he is serving and what for, and sort of taken and assigned to a wing and wing officers. Yeah, right off the bat, he is spotted as a weak element, basically. People see, it's a guy in his 50s, he's very timid, he's not talking to anyone, he looks very nervous and docile because he is very nervous and docile, and this immediately, this draws the attention of a lot of the very, very not nice at all bastards who have come into prison with him. And right off the bat, you've got Mark thrown to the wolves and not really having any real knowledge of what to do whatsoever. Running parallel to this storyline is that of Eric McNally, played by Stephen Graham. He is a corrections officer with, I think, about 22 years of service. He is known as being a very strict but very fair officer. He is very terse. He doesn't put up with any bullshit whatsoever from any of the lags, but if they treat him respectfully, he treats them respectfully. He's very, very overhanded. He's very authentic and direct and honest, sometimes to the point where he can seem a little bit unfeeling and unsympathetic, but it's just a stoicism and a toughness, a mental toughness and acuity that has come from 2 decades on the job. He's actually when he notices that a prisoner is suffering, he might not be gushy and lovey-dovey, but he does lend a sympathetic ear and he does try and help. And, through a filter of being a very tough screw. He has a secret, not a secret of any sort of moral turpitude on his part, but he has a familial secret. And it is a particular secret that could, if known by the wrong people, could be used against him in very, very, very unpleasant ways. And this becomes knowledge among prisoners who it's in the worst of all possible worlds that these particular prisoners would become privy to this kind of knowledge. And because of this, they essentially start to exert an insidious stranglehold over Officer McNally, and it throws him into a hell of an ethical quandary. It was something he has to try and deal with while balancing his professional and domestic life. These two storylines, they meet in the middle because one of the wonderful things about this show, one of the things I loved most about the show, is that the two focal characters, Cobden, played by Sean Bean, and McNally, played by Graham, Cobden is on McNally's wing, so they do have some interaction, but it doesn't go down the typical route of, this particular prisoner and this particular prison officer. They form this close, inseparable bond that's never happened before. It doesn't go down that trite route. They do obviously have interaction, but it's about the show fundamentally is about the effect that the system has on the prisoner and the detainer, if you like. I would immediately, when I'd wrapped the show up, I had a million things buzzing through my head, but I thought of Mick Ford as Archer in the 1979 theatrical version of Scum, when he says to Mr. Duke, he's like, I'm just talking about men being stripped of their dignity, cons, end screws. We aren't much different in here, And that is something that does come through here thematically, because both of them are phenomenal. Sean Bean and Stephen Graham are both phenomenal in this, but Sean Bean especially, because I love Sean Bean. I'm a massive Sean Bean fan, and I'm very used to him as tough characters, because the guy is a formidable Yorkshireman, and he communicates that very, very well. I mentioned Outlaw in the premiums last week, even though it's kind of a silly look enough film. Right away, totally buys Sean Bean as a soldier. He just has that aura about him. He has that demeanour. He carries it almost effortlessly. He is very, very believable. And here he is, still, rugged, quite strongly built Sean Bean, playing this absolutely terrified middle-class school teacher who is in prison for something that had no malice aforethought, but was just him kind of selfishly indulging his alcohol addiction, and it's leading horrendously to taking a man's life, something that he does genuinely feel very remorseful for and wants to atone for it, just being thrown into the lions then, and coming up against the most vicious and just detestable kind of bullies. One thing that time does, one of the things it did for me, it was so many scenes were like a red rag to a fucking bull, and that is a sign that a work is really, really doing its job properly.
If you're becoming frustrated with the character's
there were many, many scenes in this where I was extraordinarily full of rage, and that is, if that's not a sign of a work being incredibly successful at what it's attempting to do, nothing is. There is a lot of horror in this show, but there's also a lot of poignancy. And the nasty people in it, they are very nasty. They are very scary. And the writing does incorporate things that do habitually happen to some people in some prisons, and they are very, very unpleasant indeed. But there is also, there is a very, very dark slant to the drama. People are put in very, very precarious situations, and it makes you scared, but also just makes your heart sink for them, because it's just there are some heartbreaking quandaries here. But there's also really great hope, because like I said, it doesn't go down the saccharine route, the show, but it does raises those tough questions, those questions about forgiveness, those questions about ethical dilemmas, and the way that prisoners are conceptualized in the court of public opinion. It does go there, and it goes there with heart and with conviction and with good scripting. The only criticisms I would have of time, the only criticism at all, is that there are some minor narrative contrivances that are used to kind of bolster the drama a bit. Even though the performance is very good, you have what's his name? Brendan. Is it Brendan McCarty or McCardle? As he's sort of like the resident prison gangster. Very, very great performance. Very, very menacing and intimidating guy. But there's a slight plot contrivance that felt just a tiny bit too cinematic for my taste, even though it's completely within verisimilitude. It is. These are absolutely infinitesimal misgivings. I actually think that Time really, really excellently acted. It was well written, very, very emotionally powerful. I really liked the intellectual roads it travelled, as well as the drama that keeps one invested. I thought it's only 3 parts long, and I just thought it was really, really powerful stuff. And both Bean and Graham, they do give. I know it's an easy phrase to use, but they give absolutely top tier career best performances, and it's really, really worth. Time is worth your time.
Hey,
basically.
That's a nice sum up.
You know, it's good stuff, man. It's really good stuff. I'm really, really glad I watched it.
Really cool, man. I'll check it out for definite. Okie dokie then. Well, TV of the week. And thank you for that little miniseries thing as well, because that's really, really cool. I didn't actually have time, ironically, to watch Time, but it does sound like a hell of a show. That sounds awesome.
But yeah, very much so. I mean, for some people it might be a little bit emotionally heavy, but there are strong redemptive factors to it, and I really think that it will give people a lot of food for thought and some like sort of emotional comfort as well. It's definitely where it's got a lot of aptitude in those areas. So
cool stuff. Well, yeah, I have 2 things to talk about this week. First one is a big one, released on Disney Plus at the moment. This is Loki, starring, of course, Tom Hiddleston, playing Loki, Thor's brother in the MCU universe.
Oh, I've heard little bits about this, yeah.
Yeah, this is a spin-off tie-in as Disney Plus has been working on recently. As we know, the MCU at this point is now spread out to insane proportions, actually. This is Loki's little spin-off series based on a set of comic books that do sort of lay the plot foundations and threads down. So it is an adaptation in that sense. It also throws me up the unique problem that our bearded dragon mascot is called Floki. And yet throughout this review, I'm going to have to use the term Loki over and over again without the F on front, which I guarantee you at some point I will fuck up. But anyway, yes, this finds, you get a little bit of a flashback at the start of this actually to the events of Avengers Endgame, where at one point the Avengers travel back in time. They have Loki at that point imprisoned within their group, and he breaks away and he steals the Tesseract, a cubic device that allows people to travel through time. So he's under their care and protection. He manages to break away. The Tesseract comes tumbling past him. He grabs it and disappears off into the ether, which is where this show initially starts. So Floki is immediately apprehended by the Time Variance Authority. And they appear through these orange gates. And they capture him and they take him in as prisoner. And they put him through almost like a prison induction process, where he's stripped of his clothes. He's falls through multiple rooms where he has to sign some documentation confirming it's like a big stack of paper that's everything he's ever said. And he has to confirm this with them. And he's put into like a queue for, you know how there's American depictions of the DVLA, where you walk, or like an airport where you go through those barriers that are designed to make you walk in sort of a circle on the way up to the desk. He has to go and confirm who he is, and he's been picked up by the Time Variance Authority. And he sees a little informational film as to what the Time Variance Authority is. Now, it turns out that there are ancient beings called the Timekeepers, and their job is to ensure that time continues on one thread, that it doesn't break off into different splinter groups. And anybody that does manage to break away from the main thread of time is essentially considered a renegade and a rebel and what they term as a variant. And thereby Loki is picked up for altering the course of time and creating a branch away from the main thread. And that is the reason they have apprehended him. He's put on trial in front of a judge. And just as the judge is going to sentence him to be purged, which is essentially executed, the proceedings are interrupted by Agent Mobius, who's played by Owen Wilson. Now, Agent Mobius turns up and says, actually, before you execute him, I might have some use for this prisoner. So if you don't mind, I'm going to take him away and interview him. Agent Mobius takes him away to a room. He starts playing through all of Loki's misdeeds on a screen in front of him, all the things they've picked up while they've been monitoring his particular thread in time. And he says to him, listen, essentially you have two options. You can either be purged for breaking away from the main timeline, or you can help me with a case that's ongoing, and I'll put in a good word for you and we'll see what we can do. And like he says, well, that isn't really much choice, to be quite honest. What's the problem? What would you possibly need me for to help with your time investigations? Turns out there is another variant that is working its way through the timeline, causing branches that are unacceptable to this organization. And they've been trying to hunt this person down. And even more than that, they are fairly convinced that this variant causing problems within the timeline is in fact another Loki. So Loki begins to work with Agent Mobius within this bureaucratic organization to attempt to hunt down this other Loki in order that he may be freed or end up with a better result than being flat out murdered. Are we okay with that?
Yeah, more or less, yeah.
A lot of timey-wimey stuff, essentially. Where to start with Loki? Let's start out with the good stuff. First of all, the art design is fantastic. Really, really good, actually. The bureaucracy of the Time Authority is essentially, it's like 70s office buildings crossed with kind of like Austin Powers shag pad kind of vibes. It's all like 70s tube TV screens with obvious pixels on them and a little bit of almost shag carpeting and that sort of 70s furniture design, which I think is sort of tying in with it. It sort of looks like what 1960s, 1970s
does it look like Barbarella's spaceship?
A little bit, yeah. There's kind of that funky kind of thing going on with it in almost an Austin Powers-y kind of way. That's quite a cool art design to go with. It's a lot of people in grey suits as well. Do remind me a lot of like 60s, 70s British socialism is kind of what they were going for with it, with maybe a bit of a funky twist on it. That art design is very cool. There's a lot of jumping around in time as well, which essentially means that you're going to get lots of different environments. Some are set in the future, some of them are set relatively modern day, even experiments with color shifts and things in quite a winding refn kind of way at points, which I found kind of cool. It's quite well shot, which is kind of awesome. And herein starts to begin the problem. Now, Loki isn't a bad show. It's been absolutely raved about by many, many, many critics. Although when I was doing my research earlier, I never read reviews of things until after I've seen it. And then I look up the reviews to see whether they agree with my thoughts. I never change my review based on it. But it's nice to get some kind of consensus or see whether they've pointed out something that I was also going to point out as well. A lot of the big reviews on this have just been absolutely glowing. If you look at it on Rotten Tomatoes, it's got like 89% fresh or something like that. Really, really well received. I found it really dull. And that's a problem because it's not necessarily to do with the acting. I'm not a huge fan of Tom Hiddleston, and I don't think he's as great in the role as a lot of people think he is. I think there's an attempt to be really witty and fast-paced, and Loki is, of course, the god of mischief. So there's an attempt there to have like a fast-paced wit and a lot of jokes and sly looks to camera and little bits of physical comedy and that kind of stuff. I'm not entirely convinced Tom Hiddleston is as good at it as everyone says he is. Owen Wilson's kind of fine in it as well, in the same way that Owen Wilson is kind of fine in just about everything. He's not necessarily a bad actor, but I would say he's an average level actor. You know, it's a fairly good role for him, and it's nice to see him do something a bit different. To play this bureaucrat that's sort of stuck within a system that's trying to do its best, but starts to as the plot moves on, it starts to reveal there are holes in the system, and it might not be, the organization might not be what it says it is. But ultimately, it's got the same problems that, to me, a lot of the Marvel movies do, in that it's not as clever as it thinks it is. It's not as witty as it thinks it is. It's not as well written as it thinks it is. And it's not as well acted as it thinks it is. My problem with the Marvel movies, and I know we've sort of become notorious as a podcast for this because so many people are sort of playing into that. Yeah, I'm sure there are lots of people out there that genuinely really like the Marvel movies. I'm not saying those people are lying or anything like that. We, I think, have always had a problem with them in the sense that they're built to be these absolutely fantastic, incredibly enjoyable thrill ride spectacles. And actually, when you watch them, at least in our opinion, I know I'm speaking for both of us here, we've had many conversations in this regard, they're actually kind of dull. Yeah, and they're not particularly well written.
Do you know what a fantastic, immensely enjoyable thrill ride spectacle movie looks like? The first Jurassic Park.
Sure, yeah.
That is a fantastic, immensely enjoyable thrill ride spectacle done right.
There's a lot of fantastic things happening on screen at points, but at the same time, there's this weird flatness to everything. It never reaches above a certain point or below a certain point. It's weirdly, there's a lot of dialogue scenes that just seem to go on forever where the characterization's flat. and all the pacing's dropped. And it's not bad. But I was really kind of looking forward to this because I was thinking to myself, oh, good, because if this is as good as, I'd seen the hype around it, a lot of people were reviewing it, a lot of people were excited about it. I thought, well, if this is as good as the hype seems to be making it out to be, this will be the one where I can go on the podcast and I can say, you know what, I'm not a huge fan of the Marvel stuff, but this is the one that gets it right because it's done something different with it. What's interesting is that it's done something different. And it's still got the same problem that the Marvel movies have. It's just not particularly well written. It's not particularly well performed. It's by no means a bad piece of work. I'm not going to sit here and say it's terrible. That would be wrong. It's just really middling. And I know a lot of people disagree with me on this. I was quite pleased actually to see earlier because I was looking through these reviews going, am I just really bad at my job? Is there something here I'm just not seeing? I was quite pleased when I looked on IMDb and I started looking through user reviews to find a lot of user reviews are actually saying the same things I'm saying here. So I feel a little bit justified that it's one of those things where you kind of feel like the Emperor's new clothes kind of thing. We go, am I the only one that sees that it's kind of naked and it's actually not particularly well written? It's actually, I got like 4 episodes into this and it's only 6 episodes long and I had to struggle to finish the last 2. And the last 2 are probably the best bit of it. But for something that's only 6 episodes long, I review things all the time that are 20 episodes long or something like that. For it to be 6 episodes long and for me to start to struggle, I think says my feelings towards it. It's not bad. It's just a bit dull and a bit boring and in ways that the Marvel stuff to me often is. And if you're a Marvel fan, you probably really disagree with me and you probably love this already. And I think that's absolutely fine. Contradicting opinions are, of course, absolutely fine. Mine personally, I don't think it's particularly good. And I don't think it's as good as everyone says it is. And I think history will not remember it as well as the hype is remembering it currently, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
you say that like, I think so. Yeah. Am I being clear on that? I just don't think it's ever going to stand up as one of those landmark pieces of television that a lot of reviewers are making it out to be at the moment. I really don't think it is. I think it's better than a lot of the Marvel stuff. But then to be quite honest, I didn't really rate it that much in the first place.
Did you watch, what the fuck was it called? WandaVision?
Bits of it, yeah. But I felt bad reviewing that because it was tying into the MCU in ways that I didn't feel equipped to judge it on. I think it's much more for super, super Marvel fans. And so I didn't want to review it in the sense that I didn't want to sort of go beyond my depths. This, I think you could watch knowing very little about the MCU. And that's kind of an advantage to it. But at the same time, I thought it was badly characterized, essentially, and not particularly impressive. But it looks lovely. And it's by no means a terrible piece of work. I don't think it's as good as everyone else is making it out to be. And that's just my opinion, man. Second thing I want to talk about this week, this is only a very quick review, actually, but Netflix has recently released a semi-docuseries, semi-micro-series mini-film thing called Heist. And this is kind of cool. This is 6 episodes about 3 real-life heists, 2 episodes for each heist. And so you get sort of a mini movie over the course of those 2 episodes. And you've got it interspersed with interview footage with the actual real people that carried them out. These are real life heists and a dramatization of the events that happens that make the heist interesting in a kind of sexy, kind of blow, it's using all those heist movie tropes in it, essentially, to make things fast paced and interesting. So you're getting a mini movie with the real life people that did it, explaining things in between. The first heist is about a woman in the 90s who she ran into a guy who essentially was into Satanism and the occult. But he was a very charismatic and very cool and suave and quite a gangster-looking kind of dude. They formed a relationship together, and he eventually convinced her to move to Las Vegas, where they spent a load of stolen money and blew all of that, and then get a job working for an armored car company, where she was eventually convinced to steal the armored car and run off with the money to various parts of the world, various exotic islands and things. So that's your first one set up there. Second one is about a Cuban guy in Florida who decided that because he didn't have enough money to pay for the adoption papers for a child for his wife. They were trying to conceive through IVF and all that. Didn't really work out. He wanted to adopt a kid. Didn't have the money for it. So he decided to knock over a money sorting operation at Miami International Airport and got all of his cousins and all of his family involved in it. Like he had connections to the Cuban mob in the area. And the third one is about a guy who worked for a whiskey distillery in the south of the US that creates, have you heard of Pappy Von Winkle whiskey?
No.
Quite a famous brand, but he essentially worked for them for a while until he realized that because they only had a limited run and they only sold their whiskey at certain parts of the year, some bottles of the whiskey that he was packaging and moving around the factory were worth like $4,000 each. So he gradually started to siphon them off and start to steal cases. And then he got other people in the area going, hey, I work for a whiskey distillery too. Do you reckon you could move on a barrel of wild turkey? And so he started becoming almost like a moonshine kingpin, except he was stealing legitimate booze and moving it onwards. So you got these three heist tales, the people that enacted them and the dramatizations of their various crimes and deeds. The reason I'm bringing this up, actually, again, like I said, this is kind of a mini review for a mini series. This is really, really fun. Really entertaining fun. It's bouncy in the way like a good heist movie, almost like a comedy caper is. Because obviously when you look at a real life heist, things don't go to plan the way they do in the movies. So there's lots of, someone's brother betrayed them or somebody dropped their mask on the way in or, there's all these sort of fuck ups along the way and how they got around them, where they moved the money to, how the police started to catch them. It's got all those great elements of a really good heist movie, but for real. And it's slick and it's stylish and it's a lot of fun. It's one of those ones that I just chewed through those 6 episodes in one evening because it's kind of, one of the nice things about it is the heists are, nobody was hurt, really. It was financial damage. Nobody was even banged over the head or shot or anything like that.
You're not dealing with any sadistic criminals here.
Though in one of them, there was some horrible events happened to one of the perpetrators of the heist because things started to go quite dark with that. But actually, one of the FBI guys at one point in one of the heists he was talking about said, when you're in my line of work and you get a heist case come in and they managed to get away with the money, but nobody was hurt, you kind of admire that. Then it becomes like a kind of a fun game because all they've really done is ripped off someone's insurance company, if you think about it. They still need to be caught. It's still a crime that needs to be apprehended. But ultimately, you can almost kind of enjoy it. And I would say the same thing actually about this series. And they never really, like I say, at one point it kind of does. But for most of it, it's actually more, if you could get away with it, if you were in these people's situations and you could get away with it without anybody being hurt and just running off with the money, wouldn't you think about doing it?
This is I know it might be a bit of a weird thing to admit to, but when it comes to, because I've always, as you know, I'm a big crime guy, but I love like a lot of heist stuff. When it comes to people, when their job, if their job is that of a professional thief and they try to mitigate harm done to any other human being as much as possible, you think to yourself, okay, well, mate, you could maybe argue that they're lazy and greedy, but they're not evil people.
Yeah.
They're not really nasty people. They just don't want to do a 9 to 5.
And
they're a bit greedy.
That's one of the nice things about this show. It makes these people quite relatable because let's face it, they are just human beings who, like all of us, or like most of us anyway, have struggled financially in their lives and they've seen a way of gaming the system and stealing, which is obviously wrong. But they managed to pull it off mostly in a way, and I say mostly, without any kind of heavy violence involved, which kind of adds to the bouncy nature of the thing. Because part of you kind of wants them to get away with it. And there's bits where you hold your head in your hands and go, why the hell did you do that, you idiot? You're obviously going to get caught. What's quite interesting as well is some of them fuck up quite severely and then don't get caught for a very long time. And it does make you wonder, how many people do actually get away with this? You know what I mean? And is it as hard as you think it is?
And it's contextual, because that's if people who go around like robbing the house of like some poor person who's living hand to mouth.
Exactly.
I think they're fucking scum. But if you're like literally, if you're taking, like £12 million in bonds away from a massively insured bank.
You feel slightly less bad about it, don't you?
And you're really averse to violence. I do think to myself, fuck it. I know that might be suspect to admit to. But
from the seams of this, the FBI would agree with you as well. It's like, we knew these guys weren't really dangerous, but we still needed to get that money back.
Yeah.
It's really cool, that kind of characterization. And it's a fun ride, essentially. So I would highly recommend that.
Where can I find that again?
That's on Netflix.
Yeah. And it's in 6 parts in total?
Yep, 6 parts, but it works out like 3 mini movies of cat and mouse. And it's really, really good fun.
That's me particularly. That sounds like mega up my street.
It was a good Friday night. It was a great Friday night in.
Sweet,
definitely.
yeah. I'll be jumping on that one.
Okay, then, well, let's finish off with some trivia. And this week, obviously off the back of that, it's fairly obvious this week, Heist trivia. Of course.
Yes, you have got my attention, sir.
Well, we have done heists on the podcast before. We did art heists when I was talking about that documentary a little while back. And I think on the premium at one point we did heist trivia as well. But going through these stories, only one of them rings a bell. So I don't think I'm repeating myself. So apologies if I am, but I think this is some new heist trivia anyway, because there's so much fun in it, of course.
Fingers crossed.
Let's start out with this one. Arso Alves Reis was a Portuguese criminal who perpetrated one of the largest frauds in history against the Bank of Portugal in 1925, often called the Portuguese Banknote crisis. Alves achieved his plan by assembling a team of foreign spies and diplomats that forged a contract in the bank's name to authorize the printing of more currency. Alves obtained all the signatures needed for the contract from his team, pushed the contract through, and the bank printed him 200,000 banknotes of 500 Portuguese escudos.
Fucking hell.
I love that one. Just get the bank to print you more money. What a lovely bit of lateral thinking that is. You know, of course it's legit. They fucking printed it. In 1997, 6 men pulled off what remains the biggest cash heist in the history of the United States. The leader was Alan Pace, who turned out to be the worst safety inspector the Dunbar Armored Trucking Company ever employed. Pace timed the security cameras at the Dunbar facility in Los Angeles so he could avoid them, and recruited 5 childhood friends to help him rob the vault. They broke in, assaulted 2 guards on their lunch breaks, and loaded $18.9 million into a U-Haul. They almost got away with it, except one robber got sloppy and lent some of the stolen cash to a friend without removing the original cash straps.
Wow.
I don't feel too bad about them getting caught because they did assault police officers, and, you know, that's a step too far, I would say.
Yeah, you know, and again, I mean, like,
particularly stupid way to get caught as well.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of, you know, I've heard a lot of people like romanticize, for example, the great train robbers as, like, you know, kind of working class heroes because they were sticking it up to Her Majesty. But, like, you got to think about things like that poor fucking train driver.
Yeah, they were pretty nasty guys all around, to be honest.
You know, I mean, that's, you know, there's little tidbits like that made me think, oh, God, I can't really admire you as much as other people because you weren't actually very nice.
This is an interesting one. I mean, it's not necessarily a heist, but it is super high value fraud, which I kind of think is the same thing. You know, you don't have to walk in with a mask on your face and a gun pointed in front of you. I think just stealing money in general is a heist, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty much.
Former Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos was a greedy man. He is widely believed to have taken between US $5 billion and US $10 billion through government loans, bribes, embezzlement, taking over private companies, and outright theft. The proceeds were put in foreign bank accounts and invested in real estate in the US. He was toppled by massive protests and died in exile in Hawaii in 1989. Authorities have so far recovered more than US $4 billion of stolen assets.
But he had about 10 billion in total.
Yeah. Well, actually 15 billion if you're adding up those totals. Yeah, so 11 of that is still unaccounted for. So if you think about it in terms of dollar value, that is quite possibly, if you're going to class it as a heist, that is quite possibly the biggest of all time.
Well, I mean, it's definitely, it's fraudulent transfer of money, isn't it? You know, it is stealing. It's laundering money, which a lot of people who actively steal it with a balaclava and gun do. So, yeah. I think you could argue that's the biggest heist in the world.
The 2005 Banco Central burglary in Fortaleza, Brazil, was run... It's Fortaleza? I'm going to go with Fortaleza.
Fertilizer.
Well, actually, you're not far off. Was once recognized by the Guinness Book of World Records as the world's greatest bank robbery. To pull it off, a 25-member gang set up a fake landscaping business. They spent 3 months digging a 256-foot tunnel that led up through the bank's vault floor. Once inside, they stole several containers that held 160 million Brazilian real, worth $71.6 million in 2005. Only 8 people were arrested and just 20 million real was recovered. So the vast majority got away with it.
So, what was the original amount taken again?
So it's 160 million Brazilian real was stolen and 20 million was recovered.
Wow. I mean, still, so they got away with...
You won't find those guys, will you?
No. Not in a million years.
Living somewhere very nice, I think. Let's finish off with this one here. A robbery in Baghdad became the largest bank heist in history. The mastermind was none other than Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein. One day before the Iraq War began in 2003, he sent 3 large trucks to the central bank. He also sent his son with a handwritten note asking to withdraw nearly $1 billion to keep it away from enemy hands. The money was loaded into vans and driven away. Most of the cash was recovered in the ensuing raids, but it doesn't end here. Tasked with counting the illicit loot, American soldiers made off with hundreds of thousands of dollars for themselves and their families. 35 service members were eventually caught. I mean, if you paid your soldiers better, that wouldn't be a thing, would it?
Well, there is that.
As I understand it, the army doesn't pay particularly well.
No, they don't.
And come on, how did you make your money? Oh, I stole from Saddam Hussein's stolen loot. I mean, that's great story in bars, right?
You think, good for you. Yeah, good for you.
Okie dokie, that brings us to the end of our free podcast this week. Thank you so much for listening. We're going to go and record the premium one now if we end up surviving, because I think we're about 10 minutes away from heat stroke at this point. We're starting to get delirious. If you'd like to check out our premium content, I should probably tell you what we're doing, shouldn't I? This week, Liam's got quite a few extra takes to get through.
Yes, I do. I have a barrage of extra takes that I'm probably just going to waffle on about until Andy tells me to stop.
Yeah, no, fair enough, because I need to squeeze in. I have a review of Bruce Willis's latest as well. So
Bruce Willis? Wait a minute, is it Midnight in the Switchgrass?
It is indeed, yes.
Oh, wow, yeah, about fucking Robert Ben Rhodes. Creepy.
We're going to see if this is any better than Cosmic Sin. Spoilers, maybe. But if you'd like to join us for our premium content, please do check out cinementalist.com for a link to our Patreon page. You can follow us at CinementalCast on Twitter, and you can follow Liam at
the Movies at Wacko Jacko's Flicks.
Lovely. Yeah, that kind of wraps it up for this week, mate. Anything to add?
I don't know. Thank you, everybody, peeps.
You're going to go with thank you, everybody, peeps.
Thank you, everybody, peeps. What
is that your new sign-off?
Harry Enfield, Stavros, he's like, hello, everybody, peeps, and all that sort of thing. It's just, there you go.
We'll make it a catchphrase. We haven't really got a catchphrase. That'll be perfect. Yeah, lovely.
Thank you, everybody. Dr. Nick, I don't know, just try and do him.
Bye, everybody.
Yeah, just try and...
It'd be better to do Snake, surely. Bye.
Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, bye.
Well, there you go. That's the end of our free podcast this week, guys. Bye.
Terrible impressions of iconic characters here every week.